Archiles, who's Chair of Regional Economic Development and Director of the Productivity Lab at the Productivity Institute. So as part of our original thinking series, we inaugurated these lectures a few years ago. I think it's a wonderful tradition to hear from our new colleagues, our new professors joining us here at AMBS or who have been promoted, really to get a sense of their scholarly agenda. That's really what we are excited about, both at AMBS and why we're here this evening, to really get a sense of Raquel's scholarly agenda. What is it precisely that she wants to profess? And so that's why we're coming here together to be challenged, excited, and informed by Raquel's scholarship. I'd like to welcome colleagues who are joining us in the room today, and also those who are joining us across the globe, online, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our lecture and to Alliance Manchester Business School. So just a little bit of an introduction to Raquel. Raquel joined us in June 2022. She's based in our Innovation Management and Policy Division, and she's a member both of the Productivity Institute and the Manchester Innovation Institute for Innovation Research, MIOIR. In addition, she is also a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. Award-winning, and we'll touch on some of those awards in a minute. Raquel previously chaired the Regional Economic, was a chair in Regional Economic Development at the City Ready Research Institute at Birmingham Business School. And our current research work focuses on urban and regional inequalities and development, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And I was also excited to note that Raquel also touches on very topical issues in addition to this work, including the regional impact of Brexit, the impacts of COVID-19, and the regional effects of the digital economy and automation, all hugely relevant, important, and extremely challenging topics. Raquel has previously held positions at the University of Birmingham, the University of Groningen, the Technological University of Lisbon, the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission, the Max Planck Institute of Economics, and the University of Barcelona. And I understand that Raquel is from Barcelona, a wonderful, wonderful city. She's the holder of numerous prizes: the 2019 Martin Beckman Prize for the best paper published in Papers in Regional Science for her work on the economic exposure to Brexit in European regions, 2016 Regional Studies Best Paper Award, and the 2021 Martin Beckman Prize for the best paper published in Papers in Regional Science for her work on the regional dimensions of smart specialisation. So with all those prizes, we're very much looking forward to a stimulating lecture this evening. The title of that lecture, Data-Driven Academic Research for Supporting Smart Specialisation, Industrial Policy, and Levelling Up, is the title of Raquel's lecture this evening. She'll be presenting a series of data-driven tools and their applications designed to support and provide policy recommendations for the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of latest policy initiatives like smart specialisation in Europe and levelling up strategy here in the UK. Her lecture will critically examine the advantages and limitations of academic data-driven research for preparing our economies for new challenges. So Raquel will speak for 25 minutes or so, and that will be followed by a discussion that will be facilitated by Bart, Professor Bart van Aert, who is Professor of Productivity Studies and Director of the Productivity Institute. As always, there will be opportunity for plenty of questions, and Bart will lead those later on. So without further ado, let me hand over to Raquel. Please join me in welcoming Raquel.
Thank you very much, Ken. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today, despite the weather. The weather is so nice that me, as being Spanish, probably I wouldn't be sitting here. So I thought very much about what to present today, because, as you know, as mentioned, I have been luckily involved in many different research projects, and also in many different institutions, and I didn't want to, spend all this opportunity to just going through all the institutions where I have been. Rather, I thought that maybe in order to introduce myself, I was going to present some of the data tools I have been working with many research teams that they have been helpful to support two main research policy agendas in Europe: Smart Specialisation and also recently the Levelli. So just as a start, say that innovation, entrepreneurship, and regional development and cohesion policy have experienced evolution and a significant development in recent decades. From linear models of innovation policy to more sophisticated systemic approaches that they consider the interactions within and between regions, and also the multi-level policy settings. So these sophisticated approaches of regional policy require more and more mixed method approaches, where new methodologies and also data-related tools somehow allow capturing all of these diverse effects in this kind of complex policy programs. So understanding these different policy impacts over the territories and also among the different industries and also individuals, it is very important for providing, good policies to support the resilience and the growth of places. So today I want to do an overview very shortly and probably not very technical about four tools or four methodologies that I have used in the past and currently to support these policy agendas. I'm going to be talking about systemic composite indicator, that is the regional entrepreneurship and development index, and mentioned about was support by the European Commission, DG regional policy, and it is a good tool to optimize systemic approaches to entrepreneurship. Then I'm going to look at also another paper that we have, that we implemented a multi-level model in order to capture the potential non-linearities between industrial relatedness and regional productivity. Then I'm going to move towards a much closer geography, that is the UK, and I'm going to explain two very recent research that I'm conducting that looks at the ex-ante policy evaluation of one of the missions, the UK Levelli white paper, and also using very good data on policy initiatives in the UK. We are going to analyze as well what is the potential mediation effect in this mission. So, as I say, I'm going to start with the Smart Specialization, and for the ones that are not very familiar with the term, Smart Specialization is a policy prioritization framework that aims at finding ways to enhance the scale and effectiveness of entrepreneurial processes to develop the regional indigenous potential. So the smart specialization agenda, theoretical, but also in an applied sense, try to focus on finding ways to promote regional innovation and entrepreneurship by looking at the entrepreneurial discovery of places, the technological diversification, embeddedness, and the role of connectivity. And what it tries, or the smart specialization principles, are achieving what we call intelligent or smart growth based on obtaining the most efficient innovation results with the most effective ways of spending public resources. So we are now thinking about that in terms of policy prioritization. Not all the regions can do everything on science, technology, and innovation. Therefore, there is a need for focus, prioritization, and discovery of the regional strengths and competitiveness advantages in these regions. So given this complex way of thinking, where we are taking into consideration systemic approaches to regions, we develop a composite indicator that tries to somehow help regions to optimize the drivers of this policy prioritization for entrepreneurship in a local environment. As you might see, although I use, I think that, can you see well? The composite indicator has is structured in three main subindexes that looks at the entrepreneurial aspirations, the entrepreneurial ability, and the entrepreneurial attitudes of places. If we link those three different indexes with regional development, we can think about that the ones on entrepreneurial aspirations are better linked to factor-driven economies. The ones on entrepreneurial abilities, they are more focused on efficiency-driven economies, and the ones on entrepreneurial attitudes, they focus more on innovation-driven economies. This index is composed by 14 different pillars that are described using qualitative and quantitative information. And the pillars are based on individual variables and national and regional variables. This is a very important point because this is one of the few indicators that use also individual information. So all the individual variables are captured by the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor data. The Global Entrepreneurship Monitor data is a survey that is captured at the national level. But in this project, we regionalized that survey. So we were able to get information of the potential entrepreneurs that they were going eventually to start a business in those different regions. So we could look at, for instance, what was the perception that those individuals had on the location in terms of the informal investments that was, in the region to develop the entrepreneurial venture, or what was the perception of the competition in that particular region. The REDI, or the Regional Entrepreneurship and Development Index, as a policy tool, allows comparison across these 125 regions in Europe. So the regions, they can compare themselves looking at these different pillars, and also allows to identify the weakest spots. So we are looking here at areas of attention that they should be taken at the national level, because almost all the regions in that particular country, they seem to have lower levels of a particular point. Well, also you can focus the policy attention at a more local level if it is only one of the regions that they seem to have a much lower level of a particular place. the Regional Entrepreneurship and Development Index is not purely a tool for smart specialization. It's also a tool for other more general kind of policy agendas that are connected with entrepreneurship at the regional level. So think about the optimization of regional entrepreneurship ecosystems, that they don't have as a final objective to increase competitiveness. But the novelty, apart from having individual data, it was with what we call the penalty of for bottlenecks. And it was that the actual index for a region, it was penalized if one of the drivers of that region was very low, because if it is a systemic approach, we have to understand that, yes, we have to support the drivers in the region, but at the same time, we have to consider that if there are bottlenecks in that region, they are going to affect negatively maybe the performance of other drivers. Therefore, the penalty of bottlenecks, controlling for this local bottleneck, was a more, let's say, honest way to somehow rank the regions across Europe. So these are, you have to be cautious because this data is when the paper was written, so it's a bit old, but more or less you can see that for the UK, the analysis of the regional performance across the UK regions show that the areas of attention, they were more focused on financing, also globalisation and process innovation, where the areas of policy attention at the regional level, they were more focused on human capital, which it was quite different among the different regions. Okay, so this is my first policy tool. The second one is about looking at that the implementation challenges in smart specialization are linked with the fact that some of the policy concepts maybe they are not as linear, as direct effects as we might somehow assume. So, for instance, one of the points of the smart specialization indicates that if you increase the specialization in areas that are technologically related to your knowledge base, or technology space, then you are going to get new skills, new technological and knowledge domains, new firm creation, and eventually you are going to get automatically an increase in regional productivity, and finally, the latest impact of this policy will be an increase in European competitiveness. But of course, all of these really linear direct effects are heavily dependent on the initial regional technological base that are in this particular location. Therefore, we might assume that actually the relationship between increasing regional technological, relatedness maybe is not as direct. You put more related technologies in your place and automatically you receive this regional productivity. No, we might assume that actually the relationships might vary depending on the taxonomies of the regions. So in this paper, what we decided to do, it was looking at multi-level models where you can capture not only the characteristics of the regions, but also the characteristics of the member state or the country. You might capture these potential non-linear or direct effects on the relationship between regional technological variety or technological diversification and regional productivity, or related technological diversification or tech proximity and regional productivity. So I didn't want to put many numbers, so I just show a bit the hypothesis development, and then I indicate more or less what our results were pointing at. So the higher levels of regional performance, looking at our results, can be found at higher levels of industrial technological relatedness, or what we call epistemic proximity. Here I'm looking at Gloria, that is sitting there and is one of the experts on complexity as well. So related technological diversification. And higher levels of technological coherence, as more specialized we are, they might be, negatively related to higher levels of regional performance, because if we specialize too much in a particular technological domain, we might end up having problems of technological lock-in. Like we are very heavily specialized and we don't have very much opportunities to grow in other areas. So summarizing our results for that, we can say that activities that aim to upgrade the technological system so built upon and around the system existing capabilities. We know that they have to build in related areas. Investing in related technologies is not sufficient because it might eventually give you a process of not maybe sufficient or secure long-run positive regional economic development. So when you have somehow a portfolio of related technologies, you need to diversify into something that brings new activities to the region in order to ensure a satisfactory level of regional growth. Okay, so these are the European tools I wanted to present today. And now we move to the UK case, okay? So I'm going to talk about interregional inequalities. So this is a paper that we wrote that we compare the interregional inequalities in some of the countries. We have seen that interregional inequalities in the UK are among the greatest in the industrialized world. In the latest iteration of the industrial strategy, the UK government seeks to increase, to improve the productivity across regions in order to get a more balanced growth. We know that productivity differences, regional productivity differences in the UK are quite large, and in particular, they have been growing since the financial crisis. And you see how Greater London or the Southeast, they appear to perform exceptionally better than many other areas in the country. So for the ones that you are not very familiar about the white paper, it was written on the 2nd of February. It is a very good document. Actually, academically, it has a technical report that if anyone likes numbers, I just encourage you to have a look at it because it's very specific and has a lot of data and a lot of interesting data sources. But what they want to do is like to produce a fundamental rewiring of the system of decision-making locally, but also nationally, in order to somehow address these geographical disparities. And to do that, they introduce 5 different pillars and include different missions, okay? So here you have a summary of the different missions. And the one that I'm going to pick up today, just look at, is the R&D mission that is boosting research and development spending and focusing on areas outside what they call the Southeast. Why the Southeast? And of course, this is an ex-ante analysis because the main problem of the good Levelli white paper is that we don't have any idea of how they are going to implement these missions, right? So then it's a very good test bed, to somehow try different things and see what if the country is going that direction, what is going to happen with what they propose. So we know that the public spending, it is distributed more or less at this moment, around 59.3% of the funds in 2020-2021, they were spent in the Greater South East, and Greater Southeast is London and the Southeast. And what we would like to look at is how different scenarios for the implementation of this mission that say that they want to increase 40% of this public investment outside London and the Southeast. So for doing that, during my time in Birmingham, we were developing the multi-regional input-output model for the UK. And more or less the multi-regional input-output model allows you to look at the feedback and spillovers effect. So for instance, if you increase the demand of R&D investment in region 1, automatically you can increase the production in region 1, but then because you have increased the production in region 1, you can increase the production in region 2, and then you have these feedback effects to other regions. So we decided to build 3 different scenarios. One that it was we give the money outside London and Southeast equally, we distribute the money equally. The second scenario is what we call the redistributive scenario, is that we are giving more money to the regions that they did not have that much money in the past. And the third scenario is what we call the market-driven scenario, and it's like, because of the complementarities, we are going to give more money to the ones that already have quite a lot of private R&D and see if that combination of public and private gives more return. So, but we found that at the national level, the scenarios, they were giving very, very similar results. So it's not very much. So if the objective of that policy was to more or less be better, it doesn't matter how they are going to implement it, because it looks like we are going to get better in terms of output, employment, and GVA difference. But when we look at the regional level, it's when you have to start a bit getting a bit worried, and it's because depending on how they are going to implement this R&D mission, the results for the regions are very, very different. So you can see here the distribution in terms of colors of how is going to be an effect depending on the way that this 40% more of R&D public investment is distributed. So we see that each scenario has a very different regional effect. And it looked like the redistributive scenario, the one that we considered it like give a bit more money to the ones that they didn't have in the past that much, is the one that seems to benefit all the regions more equally. When we look at the inter-industry spillovers, the high-tech sectors are the ones that are more they are benefiting the most, but also other sectors are benefiting as well. So it's not only those high-tech sectors, the ones are benefiting the more. And the analysis also allows you to see the multiplier effects. And you can see that actually those areas that they seem to have more high-tech are the ones that they seem to show also a higher multiplier, especially in the greater Southeast. But the taking from that is that even if you don't give money to London and the Southeast, they are going to be benefiting from the externalities of having given money to other areas outside. So it is not giving money to the ones that are lagging behind, it's giving money in a way that is benefiting more. And finally, the last one, very quickly, I'm going to talk about the potential mediation of this R&D mission. So this is something that actually is coming from a paper I presented here 2 years ago, something like that. So we were looking at the public support for R&D, and we were looking at the UKRI projects, and we were looking at the relationship of the UKRI projects with regional development, economic growth, leveling up or convergence. And we were not finding a very direct relationship. But then the discussion it was, well, but UKRI never intended to increase economic growth or regional balance. Actually, UKRI intended to increase private R&D by boosting some R&D in the region with public R&D. So therefore, the way that you think about the logic of intervention of the policy is completely different. It is not a direct effect from public R&D to economic growth or leveling up. It should be a mediation effect, so an indirect effect that goes through business R&D. So this is very simplistic, but when you want to implement panel data multi-level models with mediation, it gets a bit more complicated, right? So for this last paper, we are considering multi-level modeling in a panel data setting with mediation. And of course, you have seen something similar before, but I just wanted to show you that actually, when we are looking at the intended effects for the regional development, we have seen that what we call the A path is the path that goes from regional projects to business R&D, actually is all significant. So the intended effect of the policy was achieved. They wanted to increase private R&D in the regions, fantastic. But also in terms of regional development measured as GDP overhead, we see that also UKRI managed to get a direct effect from BERT to regional development and an indirect effect from this public funding of R&D to regional development. And this is by looking at, for instance, what happened with regional projects, what happened with regional grants, what happened with interregional collaboration, because we did network analysis. And when we look at leveling up or convergence or rebalancing, well, we found that actually the intended effects of that direct effect of public R&D to business R&D, it was still maintained. We didn't find anything that show that UKRI programs were somehow contributing either directly or indirectly to convergence or leveling up. So I am just wrapping up, and I will just conclude by saying that evidence to support the implementation of policy is becoming very important to understand the potential impacts of policy mechanisms. The systemic approaches that we are more familiar now were take into consideration the interactions between the different spatial units, but also within and between regions. Also complex mechanisms with the mediating effects of different policy instruments are becoming more and more difficult to capture. But there are some, recent increasing empirical evidence that show that we have to be conscious about the role that policy interventions might have in affecting interregional disparities. And somehow today I have to show you some tools that we have developed with some of my co-authors, of course, to somehow support evidence for explaining the policy interventions in these two main policy agendas. Thank you very much.
You can sit here. Well, first of all, Raquel, congratulations with your appointment as a professor here, and clearly your short but very powerful lecture is showing how much you're contributing to the work that's being done in the entire school, but certainly in all the work that's done in the innovation group and the policy group, as well as in the Productivity Institute. You're really sort of bringing a piece of very empirical work that helps us to connect a lot of the good work that's being done. So I think you're more than welcome that you're joining us. We have actually a few things in common. That's where I would want to start. First of all, many of you may not know, but we actually have a shared history in Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands. We never were there together. I left a little earlier than you came. But once in Groningen, it's always Groningen, and it's reflected in data-oriented, very empirical approach that you're taking to issues. It's very characteristic of the work that has been going on and still going on there. So I'm very honored to have you again, and that we now actually can share time together here. The second thing we have in common is that not only have you joined the INP group, but also the Productivity Lab, as head, the Productivity Institute as head of the Productivity Lab, so we can continue all this great work. But what I think very few people know is that we have one other thing in common, and that is the Smart Specialisation strategy, which frankly I never did a lot of work on, but I was there when it was invented by Dominique Faure back at the Commission under Potocnik, who was at that time the commissioner. And Dominique and I were co-chairs of the Knowledge Advisory Committee to Potocnik, and all the credit for this work goes to Dominique, who has moved this forward. But it was really good to be part of that discussion early on and see it still being alive and kicking. But I want to actually get there with my first question to you, because when we were discussing the Smart Specialisation strategy at the time, the question was always, well, is it really good to think always about building on the strengths you already have? because a lot of innovation is actually about disruption and starting really something new. And when I look at your recent work and the paper that you described, the first paper that you described, you are actually describing the sort of trade-off between technological specialization and diversification, and there's a sort of middle ground there. So that's why you get these non-linear relationships. But that makes it essentially a very empirical question, where you end up as a place. So when you think about this as a policy tool, and you use the REDI index as a policy tool to do this, to what extent is REDI helping regions to say, where are we on that scale? And are we on this specialization track, or are we on this diversification track? Because it's very much an empirical question, so there's not one piece of single advice that you can give to every region. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah,
because that seems to be a question.
In terms of smart specialization, what you have seen many papers, and of course here is also Philip and Elvira sitting here, that they have contributed so much to the agenda as well. But you have a series of taxonomies of regions that they might have, some common traits, let's say, and things like that. So it might well be that when you are looking at the REDI also allows you to create this clustering, so you are able to not having a policy formula that works for all the regions equally, but you can create somehow thinking about the objectives, and thinking about maybe particular drivers of the indicator. You can create this clustering of different regions that then you might target a particular problem or things like that. In the case of the REDI, it doesn't go very deep in terms of technological diversification. So the indicators there are indicators on industrial specialization, maybe based on Hausmann indexes of industrial specialization or indexes of industrial specialization. In terms of technological, we are using the patent activity for the patent intensity of the place. So maybe the REDI is something more for policy implementation, because you can increase, things like you can encourage more patenting by using different policy instruments. In case of technological related diversification, this is a different completely tool, because it's more sophisticated in the granularity of the composition of the patents that are in that particular region.
So what is the future of the smart specialization strategy? Is it still, you were in Brussels yesterday, so maybe you haven't talked about it to the question. Is it still a strategy that is very extensively applied at a regional level across Europe?
Yes, indeed. I think that smart specialization is evolving. As already has been more than 10 years, smart specialization implemented. And it's evolving because, of course, the regions are also developing a more sophisticated regional strategies, but also there have been other member states that they have joined the European Union, that they might have particularly regional problems that are not in other regions. Also because there are different tools, so there are new tools that are encouraging more regions to work together with other regions, So these are different policy agendas that they go alongside the smart specialization that might have also had an effect on smart specialization.
And how is it going to go in the UK? Has this strategy been tried in the UK, and why? If not, why not?
The strategy was tried when we were part of the Union, and there are regions that they were very successful, and areas such as, for instance, the automobile cluster regions, where they were really very much moving into activities that they were very much related to the auto industry, into aerospace or any other kind of devices that the task, and the production was, the technicalities were very, very similar. So it was very, very easy to move from one activity to another. They were somehow a smart specialization in a smaller scale, not maybe in the political
I
starting.
may not have called it that, but in a way it was.
Yes, yes. But the smart specialization is going to continue because it's being implemented all over the world, in Latin America, in Australia, in Korea, in parts of the US as well. So it has a future.
Has a big future. Okay, let's take some questions from the room. We also have people online, but we'll start with the room to take any questions here. So Kieran first.
Hi, Raquel. Thank you so much. That's really all really interesting and important stuff, I think. But I want to talk about the UK analysis, which are really, I think, very relevant because, as you know, the kind of UK discourse or debate about innovation policy is hopelessly moderate. And it's kind of stuck between a desperate science push, linear, model of innovation that has never delivered and will never deliver the outcomes that we expect from innovation policy on the one hand, and then at the other end, this kind of naive idea that Innovate UK should be a business support agency helping one firm at a time to become more competitive through innovation, which, as you've shown, kind of is not sensible. So I think what you've shown is really very valuable in terms of helping us hopefully push back against some of these naiveties and problems, which is, I think, a key role of a group, an institute like ours, and the same with the Productivity Institute as well. But I wanted to ask you about one specific thing, which is the third, because obviously the Office of National Statistics has recently discovered that it's been undercounting, significantly undercounting private sector investment in R&D in the UK. And that seems to be in small firms. But we don't yet know where those small firms are, so we don't know how that changes our understanding of the spatial distribution of theirs. So I just wonder whether you kind of have any plans to repeat that leveling up analysis when we get new data, or have you got any other comment on that kind of the interesting times that we live in with regard to not really understanding actual private sector R&D activities in the UK?
Yeah. Sure. Well, thank you for the question. With regard to if we are going to replicate it with new data, yes, why not? I mean, it's something. A data person is very keen of using new data, of course. In terms of the innovation policy, well, I'm recently have joined the Research and Innovation Caucus, and I'm having many different meetings with the SRC, the UKRI, Innovate UK. And actually, I think that there is hope because many of the meetings are around knowledge spillovers, ecosystems, So I do think that they start thinking about, and actually the role of place. So eventually it's because I am in those meetings because I have to, apart from the big group of researchers that we are, I am attending those meetings that are more kind of spatially driven and more systemic approaches. But I think that they are changing the way of thinking. So I think that there is hope.
The question at the back.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot for an insightful presentation. I was curious if your insights are aligned or in conflict with the business strategy thinking, which is around specialization, ecosystem building, and and then the talent development around that specialization. I was just curious, how does your policy level recommendation relate or conflict with business strategy?
Well, I mean, some of the analysis that we have conducted also takes into consideration the interactions with business with other partners. So what we are taking into consideration, the intra-regional collaboration, we look at business with, higher education institutions and things like that. So I think that we go a bit beyond only looking at business as the main actor in an innovation ecosystem, if you think about. In the Regional Entrepreneurship and Development Index, we are taking the position of actually a potential entrepreneur. So it's even not even a person who has started a business. It's just the perception of a person that potentially is going to start a business, how that person sees the environment. So I think that in some cases, yes, we are a bit aligned with business strategy, but we go a step beyond because we are also thinking about where do this business are operating and what if eventually some of these individuals that are part of that ecosystem, eventually if they are going to start a business, if they see the opportunity there.
But diversification leads to challenges, ecosystem access, isn't it? So, because ecosystem is built over a long period of time. So if you're directing towards diversification, then it might be if I'm starting a business in an area where there is no ecosystem,
very good.
well developed, so then that is a problem.
Yes, so the principles of a smart specialization, the agenda is that normally the ecosystem should move to related technological or skill areas, where, that diversification can be somehow linked to the endogenous or already potential, So you have to build a scale and have a knowledge space that is somehow related. So you are well known because you are good at that, right? And then slowly, of course, you have to be a bit risky in order to enter in other industrial pathways, that will bring you more growth, right? So then it's when you have to somehow move a bit beyond this so related, diversification for allowing you to have more opportunities. But we have seen shocks, like in other papers like globalisation that might eventually have shock ecosystems, or the effect of automation, the robotification or the effect of automation in some places has been affected more than others. So in order somehow to improve the resilience of those ecosystems, it's good to have a space that allows you to also move to other areas that might not be as affected.
Do we have online?
Yeah, we have a few questions. We'll take two questions.
Sure.
Yeah. First one was how the work of the Productivity Institute is actually feeding into the next stage of your research.
That's a good question.
Which is good, given that we've got us in there. It's one of the questions to have. And another one that's coming from Brussels, so Dimitri in Brussels, actually. What is your view on mainstreaming smart specialisation in other related policies like industrial policy to optimise investment?
So the first one, of course, it relates very much. So what we have been doing, we have been creating, tools, data tools to help regions to see which are the main drivers on regional productivity. So if you think about, we have series of the scorecards at the ITL1 level, and also at the ITL3 level that have the main drivers of regional productivity. So the regions, they can compare against themselves. And also they can see which are the areas that they are weaker in comparison with areas in the country, looking at regional productivity. Looking at regional productivity, also we have been looking at what is the heterogeneity in the changes of productivity over time, and how areas such as we started by comparing at the ITL1 area, and we were more or less ranking always London as the region that is kind of the engine of regional productivity in the country. While the stakeholders from London came to us and say, well, within London, there are areas that are underperforming the actual regional average in the UK. So therefore, we have just been developing other tools that they are somehow focusing in, zooming in what is happening within the regional area of London to understand that actually there is a huge heterogeneity in terms of regional productivity levels and regional productivity growth over time in these particular areas that seem to be the most prosperous areas in the country, but also there are pockets there of good productivity. So yes, we are doing quite a lot. We are doing we are trying to help, isn't it, stakeholders providing evidence, but also providing data tools to help their policy agendas as well.
I would also say, if I may, the ecosystem approach that you're applying, because fundamental to the question, because it's quite often sort of very linear thinking in productivity. Well, if we invest in capital or infrastructure, we'll get these sort of productivity gains. Whereas in practice, it turns out that it is a very complex ecosystem approach where different parties, business, the education system, government, are working together and have to look for where their areas of opportunity are. So it's a much more complex decision-making process than the way that's been thought about. So that's very good. So the second question.
It was your view on mainstreaming smart specialisation in other related policies like industrial policy.
Yeah, I think it is not only industrial policy, but nowadays with the grand challenges. So you have the green agenda, for instance. Smart specialization is so important for also interacting with agendas such as the green agenda or the digital agenda in order to improve the resilience of those places by looking at which are the activities that are going to think, provide progress in 10-year time, and then they are not going to somehow displace, workers that are in those areas, or they are not going to have problems of, connected with energy crisis or things like that. So slowly, smart specialization is also going and being a tool for supporting other, big policy agendas that are alongside in parallel with smart specialization, but can somehow feed in. So think about opportunities for technological diversification in more eco kind of technologies that will somehow help in having a more sustainable, regional ecosystems as well as, productive or prosperous. So yes, I think that is a very important tool.
Any more questions in the room? Yes, it's mine.
Thanks, Raquel, for the great talk. Just wondering if you've got any good examples in Europe or the UK of post-industrial areas that have been helped by smart specialisation, and if it's reduced inequalities either within the area or within the country, and any examples that you can think of. Are they helped by public investment, or are they usually kind of latching onto global markets, or what's the kind of spark that helps these places really take off?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that there is a very large, battery of case studies on smart specialization. And then you can see that there are many, different stories that are coming from, the stakeholder involvements where, the government also takes a very good part. And I'm looking at a bit with, demand side policies that the government also is feeding, specific technologies to somehow trigger the system to start working. And of course, many times it's just this much fund that where the government is just putting some public funding alongside much fund from private investments, and then this is what the complementarities of the public and private funding, give the higher returns somehow. So there are many places also that they have been looking at specific parts of the value chain, and then they have looked at the complementarities with other parts of regions in Europe, that they are working in other parts of the value chains that they have a much higher value added. So somehow by teaming up regions that they are in a much lower kind of value added part of the value chain with others that they have. So you have many possibilities of policy learning, and the possibilities of having complementarities with industries that they operate in different parts of the value chains, but they are like the European value chains is stronger, if you want, somehow. So, and of course, as you also say, I think that Eastern Europe is benefiting quite a lot by having multinational presence. So you have many multinationals that they decide to go to Eastern Europe because the possibilities in terms of accessing maybe skilled people and things like that are higher, coming from higher education institutions. And then these multinationals, they also have creating local ecosystems, linking with SMEs in the area and generating, prosperity that probably without FDI or international presence will have never been generated in those areas. So there are multiple examples.
So yeah, yes, people here, please come.
Thank you for a great talk, Gallagher. Really excellent summary. My question is about issues, and I agree that what you said about in relation to Bart's question on the future smart specialization is going in that direction, isn't it? Addresses social challenges and we have these EU missions, these cancer, oceans, 18, so I think 4 or 5, and regions are expected to contribute to these missions. And I think that's where kind of smart specialization is kind of going. It's not easy. It's a rate of innovation and direction and view on missions, which is very much influenced European thinking in this area. But then we move to the UK, and the way in which missions is used really a lot, isn't it? So they talk about missions in that sense, but then they Levelli now use missions in a completely different way. And I wouldn't see R&D as an mission. And I think in the UK we're missing an opportunity to do a little bit the same, acknowledging as they do in Europe that regions are essential to achieve those missions, and that there needs to be kind of a multi-level approach to national and local social determinants. So I wonder how you see that in the UK. I think we have brought up with this thinking of regional problem-led or challenge-led policies.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think that you're talking about directionality as well, right? And in a multi-level government or governance context, I think it's very, very important. Yesterday in Brussels, we were talking about that. Actually, we were talking about that in order, to go somewhere, every single level of government has to have an objective, a direction, and somehow, if it is coherent, so if all the policy instruments that are or measures are applied at different levels of government, they somehow are looking at that direction. So if we are trying to implement, R&D policy instruments and measures that they go along, a green growth, so every single R&D is about, having technologies that are more sustainable, trying to support firms that are into these technologies that are more sustainable, or trying to support, the creation of new skills that are more connected with greener skills, but at the very different levels of government, having this objective, probably the impact is higher than if every single place is doing their own thing, right? And even, of course, thinking about with the complementarities between education policy, industrial policy. So yesterday, in this region, it was very nice to see that it was the employment there, the Joint Research Center there, the Committee of the Regions there, Eurocities there. So all these different, parts of the European Commission government, they were coming together to talk about place-based policies. And of course, the discussions were very much interesting, because everybody was more or less bringing something. So.
We're running out of time, but we should give the online attendance one more chance. Is there one?
There is one final one. Given the increasing requirement for the private sector organisations to invest in R&D to achieve long-term sustainable growth, how transferable do you consider the REDI to be as a framework for assessing corporate readiness to innovate?
Okay, I think that R&D is important, but I do think that as well, and we have seen it because, when COVID came, we have seen how important are also other aspects and in firms such as the digital literacy of many of the workers, right? And we had to use teach online at the same time. So I think that not only R&D, but also other investments that are complementary to R&D that are important as R&D and R&D research, technology and innovation, but also things connected with long life learning, connected with upskilling and reskilling of in order to overcome problems that we have seen following out of the middle skills distribution in many local labor markets, where you see that in the majority of the cases there are very low skilled people and high skilled people, but the middle skilled people somehow in many regions they have disappeared. So I think that as well as R&D investment, other investments in skills and better education, maybe in preparedness for potential shocks in the future are important for us.
Well, I'm sure we have another hour to discuss, but we don't have it. Maybe over drinks. So I'm handing back to Ken to wrap this up, at least the formal part.
Yes, okay. So thank you very, very much, Raquel, for an insightful and inspiring talk. It was fascinating to learn more about the levelling up implications of the distribution of UKRI funding. So thanks to Raquel and to Bart for leading. Thanks to the audience in the room for joining us and your stimulating questions. Thanks to those who joined us online and for your contribution too. We are very excited by the Productivity Institute joining our suite of world-class institutes here, and we can see the sparks beginning to develop between those sparky ideas between colleagues in our Innovation Institute and the Productivity Institute. So exciting times for us. If you're online and want to find out more, please do get in touch. And for those with us here physically, please do join us afterwards for some drinks in the Hive Cafe. Now, just finally, to advertise our next Original Thinking lecture, will be held on the 7th of June, when we will hear from Phil McCann, Chair in Urban and Regional Economics in the Productivity Institute. Now, if you're online, you won't have detected a few sniggers and laughs in the room. That's because Phil and Raquel are partners. So there's going to be a bit of head-to-head to see who's able to deliver the most engaging lecture. So please do join us then, where Phil will be discussing the causes, capital markets and consequences of UK regional productivity disparities. In the meantime, let's thank Raquel and Bart again, and a safe onward journey when you're heading home.